So we are back, better than ever.
I don't know about better than ever, but...
For our crew podcast with producer and researcher Brian, DP Seth, I'm Graham. We've survived the Antarctic tundra.
We have, just barely.
Yeah. Seth thought he was going to die, but survived, and you're thrilled to be talking about our Tom Green episode filming in Canada.
Speaking of cold places.
And speaking of places, well, Antarctica, if you thought you weren't going to get out of Canada, you thought you weren't going to get into.
Yeah, I had a little trouble getting across the border because of some decisions I made in my youth that resulted in some interactions with authority figures. Canada's pretty strict on who they let in their country, and I was able to get in on a 3-day permit, and I am no longer allowed in the country for the rest of my life.
You genuinely think that's the case?
That's what they said. Unless I get one of the two things that are on my record from my youth off. There's 2 things on my record, and I only have to get one of them off, and then I'll be able to be back in Canada. But as it stands right now, I'm not allowed in Canada.
And apparently we don't do background checks here at GB Entertainment. I've learned.
Murder convictions are very hard to get off your record, I hear.
Hey, I was going to say.
Sorry, exactly.
So what do you, like, out of curiosity, when you're in the car and everybody flew into Syracuse, is driving to Canada, we had this shoot the next day, and all of a sudden you're told you're told what, and you're thinking what?
Yeah, well, it went like, Mr. Donnelly, what happened in 2008? And it was like, well, what do you mean? That was a long time. I was like, oh man, I got arrested in 2008. And then he was like, what happened in 2009? And I was like, I got arrested in 2009. And then it was like, yeah, if you get in trouble once, it's 10 years. You're not allowed to come into Canada. And if something happens within that 10 years, then you're not allowed to come in Canada at all. So yeah, he had me like calling the court in Missouri to try to get things off my record, in which they were just like, yeah, you can't do that over the phone. You have to like get a lawyer, attest it, and the whole thing.
And you're leading filming on our shoot, both later that afternoon and the next day.
They were very cool, surprisingly cool. But yeah, he was like trying to find ways. And because of what our production cost and some other loopholes we found, he was able to get me in for 3 days on a temporary citizenship. But when I crossed the border, I had to hand that back in, and then I can't ever go back. Yeah.
Well, did you think you were going to get in?
There was a solid 20 minutes where I knew I wasn't going to get in, because he was like, he had exhausted all options, and he was very, very helpful. And he was like, there's nothing else I can do. He's like, what happens next? And I was like, well, next is I call my boss and I tell them that I can't do the shoot. And then they have to try to find a new DP, which they're not going to be able to do in this short a time. And that's the only thing that Brett overheard. So Brett goes into immediate panic mode. He's on the phone with them. And then I'm like walking past Brett, and he's like, are you? And I was like, I don't know. That's when I was going out to like call the court, and came back in, and he was like, are you? And I was like, I don't know, man.
What are you thinking when you're in the car at the time?
I mean, we just heard like things. I mean, Brett didn't know for a while what was going on, so Brett was like, yeah, things like are not looking great. Like, I don't know what's happening. I mean, Carlos and I were in the car for like 2 hours.
It was a long time. It was about a 3-hour ordeal.
Yeah, it was a long time. So yeah, we have no clue what's going on this whole time.
Yeah, it went from like, okay, we'll figure something out, to are we going to be able to figure something out, to we can't figure something out. And then out of left field, he was like, I have an idea. Pulled up some old permit, read through it, and was like, you qualify for this. And then good to go.
Well, guys, we made it.
It wasn't easy.
We were delayed a little bit, but we made it.
So you got through.
Got in.
The Tom Green shoot was a success. I think one of your favorites.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of Tom Green. He was super cool, gave us like full reign of his property. Like, it's, we got there to like do a site check, and we ended up being at his house for hours. He drove us around his full property, shot a bunch of B-roll. This has never happened in the history of my 5 years in the show. when I was setting the interview, he sat in for me for the full like 2.5 hours it took me to get the
No
interview
way.
set up. Him and Brett sat at the table
For 2.5 hours.
for 2.5 hours while and he was asking me questions. He was looking at angles and being like, oh, that's really cool. Like, why'd you decide to do this? And like literally he would be like, oh, that 2 shot. He's like, oh, that's really cool. He's like, I'm going to steal that from you. No, Tom was awesome. His property was incredible. That's like what my dream is to have, was what he has. Yeah, he was super cool. Like, yeah, I mean, it was just a laid back, like fun in the country. Got to do cool with a cool guy.
And it came about because we were doing an episode filming with Cheryl Hines.
Yeah.
That went really well. We had a blast with her, and lo and behold, they have the same publicist. And the publicist is like, "You want to go, around with Tom Green for the day at his
175 acres,
something like
that.
something like place in Canada,
Yeah.
and like chase roosters and
The pygmy
see
hens.
the horses and donkeys and it's crazy. I mean, this is a dude who's lived in the Hollywood Hills his whole life, and then ups and moves to the middle of nowhere near where he was from in Canada.
Speaking about the interview, I thought that was one of the interesting things that came from the day. Was I didn't realize going into it how actually unhappy he was living in LA, and how like his move to Canada was basically to get out of the craziness of living there and getting back to his roots.
I really sort of started realizing I missed living, not in LA, really, and home where I'm from. There's so many things about being back in Canada that sort of remind me of where my personality came from, where my comedy came from, who I am as a person, and so I was starting to miss that. I was starting to miss the feeling of, like when I started my rap group when I was a kid, or when I started doing stand-up comedy as a kid, it was really weird to be doing something like that.
So one of the moments that most stands out of the day for me was we decided to go canoeing, which was so fun. We have to film the canoeing, and it was originally, I think, going to be done one way because everybody wanted to protect the equipment, but I'm like, no, let's just do it.
Always push
and
it, yeah.
we risked the equipment, but you had to be paddled out to
The
follow us.
squeakiest paddle boat in Canada.
And we're going at an okay pace. Tom and I were in the same canoe. I have to stop paddling because we're going too fast for you guys. And then I just remember looking over at Brian, and he's like,
Yeah.
Well, because you guys got 2 people battling.
Hang on.
You're the one that's always like, oh, my body's my temple. I work out every day. And you
But-
looked like you were having a coronary.
For 2 people in one canoe that have a background in television, you just took off. And
You
there was
guys are
like,
so
hey, the
far ahead of
camera
us.
needs to be next to you. And you guys are 100 yards ahead of us.
Oh,
It
you had
was-
a drone, too.
It was like, hey guys, we're trying to
like
shoot this for TV.
Sprinting to get
And then
catch
I'm
up with
just
you.
in DP mode, so I'm like, Brian, we need to be next to them. And he's like, just hauling ass.
I'm
So then I'm
done.
like hollering at you, like, hey, can you guys just stop paddling? And then I didn't want you to paddle at all. And then you were refusing to do that because you're like, no, because then you guys are going to make fun of me for not paddling. And it was
That's
like,
true, yeah.
I just need you to keep pace with this. With both boats need to be side by side so we can have the shot, which we eventually got to.
I'm giving her all she's got, Captain.
Yeah, it was really funny because it would be parts where it was like, in my brain it was just like all about the shot and like the paddles coming in my shot. I'm like, Brian, your paddle's getting in my shot, and he's like, I'm paddling a rowboat. Like, yeah, it's so squeaky.
I really struggle with the paddling though. I rammed you guys at least one time.
Favorite part of the episode was what?
My favorite part was having you sit in the cold for 3 hours.
Seth told me this morning that, by the way, we set up on the screened-in porch, thinking to myself, what the are you doing if there are no heaters? And there are no heaters, and it's only going to be in the low 40s the entirety of the interview, so that's going to be fun.
I gave you a
didn't
heads
have
up.
a tire.
I gave you a heads up.
Well, yeah, after I was already in Canada and hadn't packed to do a 3-hour outside
And
interview.
also, Brett was the one that was like, maybe text Graham and let him know that we're doing it outside.
Yeah.
It was literally the only option, man. It was either that or it was not going to look good.
It did actually look quite good, but I was.
I felt
I mean,
bad.
I was like shaking for a decent part of the interview, and
Yeah.
then you mother were like the only one on the crew inside during the whole taping.
I had to watch A-Camp.
He's the DP. He controls the
I would go
environment.
out there to check on stuff and be like, man, it's cold out here.
Yeah.
The funniest part for that was you wanting to warm your hands up, and I turned on the hot water for you, and like you put your hands in, you're like, I can't even tell if this is hot or not, and I felt it, and it was boiling hot, and I was like, you're probably burning your skin.
I was freezing.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
My favorite part was the guinea hen interruption.
Oh.
Near the beginning of the interview, some of his guinea hens were milling about the house, and they were extremely loud. And it looked like for a time we weren't going to be able to do anything about it. And then you and Brett kind of started the process of hurting them.
Yeah. We had
Well,
a little
Tom was
detour.
just gonna. Tom was like, yeah, they'll probably do it for a while and then stop. And then Brett's like, but they can't. We can't. What do you mean? What do you mean? Yeah. But we got him stopped, and it
guys-
made for a fun little moment in the episode.
I thought that was one of the highlights of the episode. You guys herding the guinea hens.
Nope, 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 nope. Other way, other way, other way, other way, other way.
And you guys had your BTS camera that worked perfectly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
for it.
that was-
Thank you, Canon, for sending us that. Yeah. Yeah, that worked great. It was a great moment. It was a really fun moment, and just hearing Tom say hilarious things of like, I think we have to let them decide to go into the chase.
Well, my favorite part of the episode actually was the conclusion of the show when he's singing a song and you guys have like properly cut it to look like an actual music video. It was so cool.
So yeah, right after I moved here, I wrote this song about moving home to Canada. I want to live with my feet on the ground, grass under my toes, where the wind blows and the leaves fall down.
As soon as he was playing that song, I remember we were all like, this is how the episode is gonna end. It's like always great when you're in the moment and you already like can see how the story is gonna be told. Like
Yeah.
that was a really cool moment.
It's also nice to do something for a guest like that who, like, I don't know, you're kind of rooting for. Like, not that he needs us to root for him, but he was just such a good guy. And, like I don't know if I've ever had a guest, like, hug me at the end of a shoot, but, like, when we were leaving, he was like, come here. And, like, he gave me, like, a genuine hug.
You were
Yeah.
pretty excited about that, I remember.
I love Tom Green. I've loved Tom Green since I was, like, in middle school.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And then hopefully we'll see him when he's in St. Louis in
April?
a number of months.
Yeah.
Put it on the calendar. We can do an office detour to his show.
Office comedy show.
For Brian and Seth, you were looking at my fingers. My finger look weird.
You were just pointing. I was just...
For Brian and Seth, I'm Graham. Goodbye.